So with getting into the right type of person and the kind of problematic personality profiles and things like that, the thing that stood out to me recently that you've been doing on LinkedIn is this cognitive bias series that you've been speaking towards. Can you talk to us a little bit about like kind of what your interest is in cognitive bias specifically and why you've been devoting some time to that area?
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. Because there's just bias everywhere,
Oh yeah.
especially right now. I mean, in the way that how divided the country seems to be, and yeah, it just seems especially relevant. But I'll tell you what really started my interest in biases. When I would do personnel selection boards, the first thing that the psychologist that we typically do is we do a training for the board members. And we go over common biases that can come up in personnel selection. So we cover things like the halo effect, where like one trait can kind of overshadow other traits. And so like the best example of this is like height. I saw some. The theme here is going to be me butchering numbers here, but I think the stat, if I remember it correctly, was over a 30-year career. Someone who was 6 foot tall made like $166,000 more than somebody that was like 5'10".
Dang, sorry about that.
Um, and so, yeah, and yeah, we throw gender in there too because that's a well known one. But you think about that, like height has nothing to do with actual leadership skill,
Mm-hmm.
but people tend to overestimate like how good of a leader somebody is based on how tall they are. And so and I think that applied with like management positions and also sales, because you have that kind of authority, being a little bit bigger. So we would do like bias training with boards. And I've had lots of different board members, board presidents, and they've had different philosophies over the years. And um, my more difficult board presidents were the ones that believed that we as psychologists biased the board.
Hmm.
And so they were very, very hesitant to accept our information. They didn't want us sharing a lot of stuff. And so it just kind of made me really sort of dig into the literature on bias, and try to best educate them on what bias is. Because really, you guys know, like bias really is more of an internal process, for the most part. Bias is you have pre-existing beliefs about something based off of your upbringing, and our brains they try to be very efficient, and so we tap into these shortcuts where we can, to help us make sense of the world. And so, like most of us at some point have probably experienced, like when we think of like leaders, we probably think of like soldiers and big and strong. And so like you tie in that height with, with leadership effectiveness, and then you run with it. My rebuttal with the psychs are biasing the board is, I always use the analogy of like if you go to the doctor and because you twisted your ankle, and the doctor was like, well, let's do an x-ray to see if it's broken. And you're like, no, doc, I don't want to see an x-ray. I don't want to be biased. Like at what point are you considering data biasing? And my argument too is like, yes, we're going to influence you to an extent, but if you want to, if like the answer is not to shut everything out, because when you have an absence of information, then you're trading one bias for a much more dangerous one, and that's your intuition. So I'm always a fan of kind of going down the road of more data is better, but the data needs to be reliable. It needs to be valid, reliable, information. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess that's really where the interest came from. I see a lot of people being biased with discussions and stuff that are happening around sort of topical events and everything. And so, I think it's those two things, like advising hiring boards plus seeing what's going on in the world. I thought it might be good to do like a series on biases.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Like in this field, I think we um, know more or are more aware of biases and how they impact everyone's day to day. But I imagine people outside of the psychology world, um, I think even their awareness that biases exist and that they have them and what they are is like the first step in kind of working through any of it. I just don't know that everyone thinks about their biases with regularity. Like,
yeah, which is cool. Why you like how you mentioned that you lead into those with bias awareness kind of training of let's talk about what this is before we introduce information to you. You need to be cognizant of how you're going to receive it and how it's going to influence your decision making. That seems like a pretty critical step.
It also takes like emotional intelligence to be aware of your own and then recognize when they're coming up and how you respond to them.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and I think that's the rationale behind it. Is that if you're aware of the biases, then you're less likely to fall into them, or you can kind of catch yourself. But it also gives us a language too, where in a board process, if we see a board member, falling into the like me bias, so this person's like, I see similar traits in this person, so that I think I know more about them than what I actually do because they're similar to me. We can kind of call that out and be like, hey, I think you're falling into this. And because we've got that language, or maybe their peer, it's actually more likely that their peer will call them out and be like, hey, that's the like me bias, I think it's helpful. I have an example, and this is just like anecdotal. I used to ride a bike to class in grad school. I lived close enough where I could, ride it. And I remember we had just learned about the bystander effect, and so for the listeners that are not familiar, the idea is that if there's more people around, someone's less likely to intervene if they feel like they need to. So I think there was one example of someone who a woman outside of or in New York City who was being a victim. She was being attacked by someone, right? She was like stabbed or something, and there were people around, in the apartment complex, but no one did anything because they assumed that someone else was calling the police or whatever.
Over 30 witnesses, I think.
Yeah. Like people even like shouted from the window,
Yep.
But then didn't do anything. So this was fresh in my mind, and I was riding home on my bike, and I'm going down this hill. And it's a busy intersection on campus. And I see this girl walk out of the building and go downstairs, and she trips and she just rolls like down these stairs, and she sort of hits, and she's fine, but she kind of hits the ground and just like kind of looking around, and like no one even stopped. Like everybody's just walking. And so for me, I'm thinking bystander effect, like nobody's going to help her. And so I pull over and I help her up. I don't know if I would have pulled over if I was not familiar with that, that it's less likely for people to stop and help because there's more people around. So I think I don't know, that's my justification for like doing bias training. I think the more familiar you are with this stuff, the more likely you are to catch yourself when you're doing it.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think about it every time we're driving. If I see someone that's pulled over, like my heart wrenches and I'm like, Jen, should we stop? And then it's always in my head. I'm like, someone else probably will stop, or they don't want somebody to stop. That'll probably freak them out even more if another car, like you're going through all these thought patterns. But the awareness of what that is the first thing that usually hits me. God, I bet everybody's thinking that someone else is going to stop.
But also if it's a, I don't know, a risky situation or like a safety issue, you also have to figure out like, is this not worth, but am I in a place where I can risk my own safety in order to help this other person? And would it make it worse for them, worse for me? Like, should I insert myself in this?
And then you're 10 miles past.
Right. And then it's gone.
It's gone. Yeah. And it's funny too, because I feel like bias has such a negative connotation. When you mentioned this earlier, really what a lot of bias is it's how you receive and allow information to influence your next action or thought. So like if there's nothing inherently wrong with having intuition. There's nothing wrong with having knowledge about a previous situation and applying that to how you're going to intervene in this particular scenario. The problem comes into play when you let that dictate your next decision, and you're not able to like take in all the information and have this like situational kind of in the moment context around it. We think about this when you think about interviewing, like going into a conversation with somebody. Like, do you want all the information on the individual, or is it going to bias you to think that they're guilty and maybe they're not, or maybe that they're fabricating information as a victim and maybe it's legitimate? I think still having all the information is helpful as long as it's objective information and you're able to have some control over not letting that influence conclusions that you're drawing until you're able to validate them with the individual. When we talk about the cognitive bias thing, and then I mentioned this before we hit record, but one area that I've always been super fascinated with is the people that have this sense of confidence in something, or they believe that they are highly credible or educated in a particular area of practice, but in fact they are not. So like that Dunning-Kruger, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Would you mind talking a little bit about kind of what that is?
Yeah. So the Dunning-Kruger effect, named after two psychologists, Dunning and Kruger, but it's this idea that if you picture a graph, and on the y-axis is your confidence in like how much you know about something. And then on the x-axis is your actual like experience with this thing. And when you look at the graph, like initially when people learn just a little bit about a topic, then their confidence goes through the roof. They think that they know everything about this. And I experienced this when I graduated with my bachelor's in psychology. I remember thinking like, I know everything about psychology, Yeah. And I got into grad school and I realized, holy cow, I know nothing about psychology. And so the Dunning-Kruger effect is you have that like immediate jump in the graph. And then as you get more experience, it bottoms out. And so Dunning and Kruger call that the valley of despair, where you're bottomed out and you're like, man, I don't know anything. And then for me, like when I graduated with my PhD, then I realized like we as a field don't know a whole lot, and that was even more scary. But what's interesting to me with the Dunning-Kruger effect is all the people that sort of live at the top of that initial kind of peak. Dunning and Kruger call that the peak of Mount Stupid, which is not very flattering, right? Yeah. But it's this idea that like, when people like learn a little bit about something, all of a sudden they think they're experts and they think they know everything, and they're really ignorant. Adam Grant is probably one of my favorite IO psychologists, and he has like the best definition of arrogance that I think I've heard. He said arrogance is ignorance plus confidence. And it's true. I mean, people that live on the top of Mount Stupid, they're not just ignorant, but they don't know that they're ignorant. They're confident with their ignorance. And then they're going around, preaching it. So yeah, that's the Dunning-Kruger effect in a nutshell.
Yeah. I can't imagine like living up there. I think most people struggle with like imposter syndrome, so the opposite of this. So it blows my mind that people actually live in at the top of Mount Stupid, and their confidence, they believe that they know more than they know.
Yeah, that's the interesting paradox to me, is that imposter syndrome, when you look at who experiences imposter syndrome, it's the high achieving people. Mm-hmm. It's the ones that are actually experts in their field. But they feel like, man, like, I don't know how I got here. I actually shouldn't be here. Somehow I was lucky and I got to where I am. When they're actually incredibly competent people, but they don't feel it. There's a quote. It might have been Bukowski. I think it's disputed who actually said it, but the quote goes something like this: is that the problem with the world is that the stupid people are so full of confidence, and then the smart people are, full of doubt. It's something around that. But like that describes what we're talking about here so much, is like the competent, smart people that you want speaking up have imposter syndrome, and they're afraid. They're like, oh, I don't think I'm that competent. And the ones you don't want to hear from are the ones that live on the top of Mount Stupid, and so it's just, it's problematic, because then you throw in other biases like the confidence equals competence bias, where people think that if just because somebody's confident in what they're saying, then they must be competent. And so, and then like the more you hear things, the more like that kind of that sort of like digs its heels into your heuristics of what's accurate and what's not. And so you get all these people that are shouting from the top of Mount Stupid, and it just has this sort of weird contagion effect to where it just sort of gains traction. So it's just I don't know, it's just not good.
It's wild to me and incredibly frustrating, especially like in today's landscape, where it feels like the people with the loudest microphones are the ones on Mount Stupid, like we're saying. So we're
Yeah.
just inundated with that type of personality in high ranking positions in a lot of organizations and within government agencies. And then the people that work under them that are the competent ones in a lot of cases, that are quiet and that are they're humble, they're all like, how the heck did this guy or this woman get into this position?
Yeah.
And it's because that guy or that woman, they were taking risks. They were, putting themselves out there. They were pretending to be what we want the competent person to actually be. And they get into those roles.
Yeah.
But how do you screen for that? How can you find if somebody is genuinely competent and possesses that element of humility versus arrogant or ignorant and feigning competence? Like that
Mhm.
seems like such a tricky spot to be able to find.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the only answer that comes up for me is that the ones that are so narcissistic, that are like so far out in the tail of the bell curve, they lack so much self-awareness and EQ, like you guys were saying, that they sort of tell on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking of a candidate that I had a few weeks ago at another assessment selection, and holy cow, man, he oozed of narcissism, and like he couldn't help himself. Like when I asked him questions, about himself, like tell me about your greatest accomplishment. Tell me about and he is just everything is I me, and so it was clear that this guy's motives are to promote himself. I think the more dangerous ones are the ones that are a little more socially savvy,
Mm-hmm.
and they know like how to say the right answers in like a job interview, and it doesn't quite come out until they're already in the job. So I don't have a good answer for you, unfortunately. Like I feel like doing the peer stuff in the military helps us, but in the civilian world, like actually assessing for those traits, I mean, we can use all of our tools, but at the end of the day, I don't know if we have anything really good, like really effective at sniffing those folks out.
I think it takes time and like
Hmm.
observation, and you can't do that in an assessment or
They
an
out
interview.
themselves eventually.
It just takes
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
Hmm.
I feel like it's more prominent too when you have scenarios where people kind of just exist in these echo chambers where they get to like that Mount Stupid peak, and the only thing that's being reinforced is that they have the level of knowledge that they have, and they believe like that's the top of the stack, and there's
Hmm.
nobody that's giving them any conflicting information to that narrative. So it's just like it creates this sense of like hyper arrogance in the
Yeah.
individual,
Yeah.
without ever being challenged. But their knowledge level is really only very surface level.
Hmm.
But no one's ever kind of peeked under the hood to see how deep does this really go.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Tasha Urich, I think, is the name of the person. She wrote a book called Insight, and it's about self awareness.
hmm,
And one of the stats from that book, one of the findings that sticks with me, is that as leaders progress in rank, their self awareness halts, and the reason it halts is because they have fewer and fewer people, like fewer and fewer peers, to tell them the truth, and then the voices they do hear are the sycophants, the ones that are just trying to kiss behind because they're trying to promote themselves, and all of a sudden their mirror becomes foggy because they think, well, maybe I am the greatest leader they've ever had, and so I think to your point, I think that's a really interesting sort of dynamic that happens is when those people get in those positions and all of a sudden they're not hearing the truth, if they lack self-awareness or if they lack EQ, then they're going to believe it. And what's even crazier is that those people tend to create environments that are not very psychologically safe. And when you have environments that are not psychologically safe, then you've got more people doing things out of self-preservation purposes, like people that are trying to suck up to the boss because they really want that promotion. They really want the boss to like them. They're scared of being embarrassed, or they're scared of whatever could happen. I'm thinking of a story from when Elon Musk took over Twitter. Mm-hmm. And when he came in, the culture of Twitter completely went from day to night, from based on his leadership style. But I remember a story where there was an employee who made an inappropriate joke in a meeting with Musk, and Musk laughed. And afterwards, he was like nudging his buddies. He was like, "Did you see that? I made him laugh. He's going to remember me." And so like that leader's style, and like that leader's tendency to pull from that sort of sense of humor, and maybe something that would be inappropriate. Like those leaders are gonna pull for like the behind kissing and things like that in the organization. And I think it just creates a really weird sort of dynamic that's not good for the organization, because you got people that are fearful. They're doing things to try to keep their jobs. They're not very productive. Like Twitter, for example, people started spending their time trying to look like they were being busy because they were afraid they were going to lose their jobs. And so they were actually not as productive as what they were before, because they were like really trying to make sure the boss sees that they're busy.
It's a great example too of just like being able to spot the type of leader or the type of personality that is in it for the right reasons, like what actually motivates them to do their job and to excel within their role. And it would actually be interesting to see like people who are intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically motivated, and like those individuals that operate from a sense of value and purpose and morals and integrity in whatever their job is, whether they work in a retail environment or if they're an operator within the military. I wonder if there's a correlation between the person who's motivated by a higher standard, by higher values, by integrity, and the likelihood of them falling into this Dunning-Kruger type of bias, this kind of ignorance and versus competence type thing, versus the individual who is narcissistic and they're in it for themselves and they're motivated by money, by status, by title. I wonder if that would be a way that you could isolate that type of individual as almost like a forecast or a prediction, if they'll be that type of leader.
Like asking them to identify their core values.
Is that something you've seen?
Only anecdotally. I don't think I have any research backed answer for that, but I have kind of seen that where we dig into the values of like, we'll ask things like, what keeps you going? Like, what's your drive? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times if it's, oh, I want to get to the next level, I want to make this, or if it's the brotherhood, like I do this for, the guy next to me, the kind of others focused sort of piece, I think I think those are indicators of somebody who is more focused on other folks than themselves. I think you're onto something. I think values is probably a pretty fruitful area to go down in some of these interviews or these assessments. I've got colleagues that like they include values measures in these things. And we haven't really done that much in the military, so I don't have a lot of experience using that, but I'm considering including like a values measure in some of my civilian work, because I think, to your point, I think there's some benefit to that.
And you're also looking for like the extremes on either end, because you do want someone that strives for more and, does focus on themselves a little bit, but also cares for the people next to them. So we're looking for like the extremes for any of it. And like I said, you're not going to see that until time and observation, but identifying, I think, people's core values. Like I would struggle to name 5 of my core values right now, but it would take time for me to like think through it and put it down. But I imagine that would be a good place to start.
It's interesting too, like what you just said. People in leadership positions, like I'd imagine there's an element of narcissism that is good. Like it can be highly productive, highly valuable. So it's not having this negative bias towards narcissistic personality tendencies just in general. It's understanding what are they and how can they have positive impact on someone in a leadership role, and why may you actually need some of those qualities and characteristics, in some capacities versus others, and how you can kind of balance out the negative with the positive.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen cases where narcissistic leaders they've actually taken really good care of their team because they viewed the team as part of them, and so it was almost like they were like fiercely protective of their team, but it was like at the detriment of the rest of the organization. They were sort of competitive and putting everybody else down. So I've seen it work out that way. I think when I think of narcissism, like I think of that fragile, inflated self-esteem that like deep down they feel like they're inadequate and they're trying their hardest to convince the rest of the world that that's not the case and they're the greatest thing ever, but it's a black hole that's just they can never fill. And that's depressing. To me, that's just dangerous, because they're always going to try to promote themselves and, maybe they're promoting their team right now, but as soon as that team threatens that ego, then they're going to throw the team under the bus. And, and so I just think it's dangerous.
I have a question that is not related to what we're talking about currently, but I'm always interested in like how, especially in this field, how people got to where they are. So is what you're doing right now, I'm going back to the beginning, is what you're doing right now, like, is this where you thought you'd be? Is this where you kind of like intentionally made decisions to get to this place? Or when you got your PhD in clinical psych, was this your plan?
Yeah, the short answer is no. So going back to the 5 factors of personality, I'm not very conscientious. I'm very impulsive and not very like deliberate, and I know that about myself, and I still do things like a friend will send me a text to go meet him for lunch somewhere, and I'm like, okay, cool, I got it, and then I'll go to the wrong place because I misread the text, that kind of thing. So so in high school, I remember taking a psychology class, and I thought it was super interesting, and I was really intrigued at why people did what they did. Like, which, reading your podcast website, it sounds like you guys are kind of in the same boat there. Like you really enjoy learning like why people do what they do. And so that was kind of the seed that was planted. Went to college, working on my bachelor's in psychology. And I was not a very good student. Like I just kind of, I wasn't lazy, but I just wasn't really that interested. And so going into my junior year, I think I had like a 2.4 GPA. Like it was awful. And I remember talking to my advisor and like having the realization you can't do much with a bachelor's in psychology.
Oh my God, they don't tell you that until your senior year.
Yeah, there's a lot of those degrees,
and
unfortunately.
I graduated and I was like, oh, here's what I want to do. And like, well, it turns out you have to go back to school. Like, why did no one tell me that?
Right. Yeah. And so I had the same thing. And I was like, well, crap. And so I need to get into grad school. Yeah. And if I want to get into grad school, I got to get my GPA up. And I was able to get it up over a 3, but barely. And applied to a bunch of different programs, and I only got into one, and that was the master's program at Southern Miss. And when I got into the program, that was when I realized that, okay, like this is what I want to do. Like I really enjoy this. I'm stimulated, and the stars aligned for me. I actually had a situation where the doctoral program had an opening that they didn't fill, and they knew that I was going to apply to that program after I got my master's. And they let me apply early, and I was able to get in. So like I did 1 year in my master's and then moved into the doctorate program. And then from that point forward, I was like, this is great. Like I very much enjoyed it. But I was going to go down the road of academia. I like research. That was my route. But one day an Air Force recruiter walked in and told us about Air Force psychology. And I had no idea that military psychology was a thing. And so So then I'm interested in the Air Force. And then a guy, Matt Gelker is his name. He was in our clinical program. I was in the counseling program. He had gone and joined the Army and was finishing up his internship. He came back to defend his dissertation, and he sent an email out. He's like, is anybody interested in hearing about Army psychology? And I took him up on it. And so we met in a Starbucks. And the first thing he said to me was, he's like, I hear you're interested in the Air Force. I'm going to talk you out of the Air Force and into the Army. And he succeeded because he told me about operational psychology. He told me about Ranger Regiment, and I still didn't know what it was, but it just sounded like really, really exciting. And so I applied to some Army internships as well as Air Force. And when I went and did interviews, the Army internship that I ended up going to, they blew me away. Like, they were incredibly warm, and like it seemed like a really kind of growth opportunity for me. And that was up in Tacoma, Washington. And I went that route. And then at that point, then my trajectory was sort of set. Like, at that point I was like, okay, like I like this. I like being a soldier. I'm really interested in doing the operational psychology route. And so I applied for that residency and was fortunate to get it. And then I went to Fort Bragg and did that. And then, you heard the rest of the story. I saw a quote a while back that stuck with me, is that you're always one decision away from a completely different life.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had that happen numerous times, to where I'm like, man, if I had done this different, if the thunderstorm didn't roll into Ranger School, then I may have gotten kicked out of Ranger Regiment,
I've heard this, I don't know if this is like an internet term, but the butterfly effect. If this one thing didn't happen at the time that it did, your life would be totally different. And it sounds like you've had a handful of those.
Yeah, I still am. Like when I decided to get out of the Army, I was at a crossroads, and it was a situation where I had some great opportunities in the Army, and that was my trajectory. Like, I went from Ranger Regiment to this next unit. I was going to slide into leadership position in that unit. I was going to go to Fort Bragg, after that, and be a part of kind of the leadership of operational psychology eventually, hopefully. But that was kind of the trajectory. I'd gotten to a point where I didn't quite have the work fulfillment that I had when I was at Ranger Regiment, and also had some stuff going on in my personal life. Like, I got a divorce when I left Ranger Regiment, and so I'd kind of chosen career over relationships for so long. And then I hit that point where I'm like, well, like, do I do what I've always done and just bulldoze forward with the career, or do I just act the opposite? And do I prioritize relationships and leave the career and do something different? And so I chose the latter option. And it 100% has changed the trajectory of my life. So it's kind of, the butterfly effect you're talking about is I think it's really interesting, just to think about all the different universes, the parallel universes that we could have.
Do you want to talk about parallel universes? I'm just
we could talk about that forever too. But even like how we met, and every major decision in Crossroads, for me personally in my life, did come down to like picking one of two decisions, and everything would have been different if you picked a different choice. Yeah. So it's just it's crazy. Life is so wild.
Oh, consulting. I feel like that's where everyone in psychology should end up. That's where the money is. It's less
freedom and flexibility.
Yeah. When I was doing mental health therapy, I was working with a lot of like crisis situations, and it was teens. So I was working with their parents or, adults. And hindsight, like I that's not something I can emotionally sustain or do anymore. And I always thought, like, maybe one day I'll own my own practice, but this consulting is, I think that's the key. And it's so cool. You do have that area of expertise, and you get to like impart that knowledge and experience on other people, because you, like you said, with validity, like you've seen it work.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's like an underutilized, area for us. I think everybody could benefit from a consultant that has expertise in our field. I think they just don't realize it. Like when you talk to any business leader and ask them like, what over the years that you've been doing this, what has kept you up at night? And it's always some problem related to human beings. It's always like, did I hire the right person, or how do I like resolve the conflict in my shop, or whatever. I mean, even coaching. This is going to be a controversial statement, and people have slapped my wrist for saying this, but when you look at the mechanism of coaching, it is no different than therapy. Now, the problem set is different, but like when you're helping somebody get from point A to point B, like you're helping them achieve their goals. And I've had a bunch of people say that, man, everybody should do therapy. And I don't know if I agree with that, but I think everybody should do either therapy or coaching, depending on what the problem set is, because I think we could all benefit from having that dedicated time every week or every other week where we focus on us. And we focus on like, how do I improve my life, whether it's professional or personal or whatever. And so I think this is an underutilized resource that companies are just, I don't think they quite understand that it exists. And so I had a friend, somebody says recently that, do you think this is like a new golden age for psychology? I mean, I think it could be if we get enough folks that are kind of moving into this space and like taking and applying the skill set to help these organizations improve. So yeah. So if you guys want to get into consulting,
Yeah, eventually that's definitely. What's funny, and it ties into what we were talking about. I know we need to wrap it up. We talk about this field of like coaching. It's much less structured and regulated. So you've got
it's not regulated at all.
You have these like armchair psychologists pretty much that are coming out of the woodwork on social media, doing essentially what like a clinician has gone to school and gotten their doctorate and received significant evidence-based training to do their jobs. You've got people claiming to be able to do the same thing, if not better, with no credentials. So it's and they believe what they're doing is just as good, if not better. So it's like it is a lot of parallels to what we've been talking about of doing. How do you actually effectively assess somebody's credibility in what they're claiming to be able to do for you? And I know there are psychologists and trained practitioners that are also incompetent in a lot of ways. So just having the degree or the letters doesn't make you credible necessarily, but I feel like that is going to muddy the waters a lot, this coaching concept of who can do it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you see that in the consulting world everywhere. I mean, it is a red ocean. There are consultants everywhere.
Yeah. I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, and it's someone who lived near DC. As someone who lived near DC for a little while, it's a running joke of like, oh, he's a consultant, like because there's so many running around, and like the implication is that, oh, they're just a charlatan. They're a snake oil salesman. They don't really do anything. So yeah, I mean, there's a ton of that. A struggle that I've had is that how do I market myself to these companies and explain that this is my expertise and I have training in this, and do it better than the guy who has no expertise but is a really good marketer. That's been probably the hardest part of like being out of the military, because like when I was with Ranger Regiment, like I'm already in it. I'm internal. I'm already part of the unit. Like I'm already trusted. And so all I had to do was focus on my job, and it was wonderful. Now I have to like spend a considerable amount of time like trying to sell myself. And it's tough because you have all these other people running around.
That's something else that they don't tell you in school is in the field of psychology, you have to be able to learn business. There's legalities that you have to learn. There's marketing and sales that goes against what most psychologists know how to do. And
there's no training.
There's no training in any of that. I mean, you are, especially when you get to the consulting, or if you own your own private practice or whatever, like you are a business, and that is not something we are ever taught. So it's hard when you get out there, because you have, then you said, right, these business people or these salespeople that can sell themselves, and we're now just learning that we have to do that, and you have to have like some internet presence at this point, and social media, like it's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it ties into what we were talking about before with the Dunning-Kruger effect. I mean, you have these consultants that they don't have really any real expertise, but they have just enough to be at the peak of Mount Stupid. and then they're just preaching from the mountaintop how great they are. And then like other people, they don't know any better. And so they're like, well, this guy, he's confident, so I'm going to give him a shot. Meanwhile, you got somebody like me that's down in the valley of despair that's not even confident, to sell myself. So.
It's the unfortunate irony of the situation. Like anytime I see and not saying like people in their 20s can't give business consultation advice to leadership executives, but when I see like a 28-year-old, 26-year-old, and then you look at their background on LinkedIn and they've had like 2 jobs since college, none of them in significant levels of leadership, and now their role is executive leadership coaching, and they don't have like any other credentials to support it other than this is just what they like doing. It's
not
like
even credentials, experience.
Yeah. So and then you've got somebody like you that, I mean, just a wealth of practical, relevant training and experience in this position where you have to like fight to get to get your name out there and for people to see what you're offering.
I've been toying around with a book idea, and the title would be "Nothing is Real." And it would be all about this, like everything is manipulation, and bias and bring up examples like this, like what we're talking about.
I love that so much. It's a topic that has always been near and dear for me, of working in so many different jobs where I've had direct supervisors or higher level leadership that is just grossly incompetent and just this heightened level of arrogance in their skill set, and they don't even see it as being a miss. They see it as being accurate assessment of who they are and what their knowledge is. It's always blown my mind how often and how, I guess, just how frequent of a problem that really is. And it does come down just to how they sold themselves, how they manipulated the people around them, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And people are highly suggestible, and it breeds this type of personality to get in those roles of high visibility.
It does. Yeah.
We'll write the book. We'll buy it.
Yeah. I need to be more conscientious first to actually finish it, but yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Well, this has been awesome, incredibly insightful, and really, really great conversation. So, Jeremy, thanks so much.
Thank you. This has been awesome. It's been great.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. This is fun.
If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, we'll include your information in the show notes. But is there a direct kind of resource that you'd like us to point people towards?
Yeah, I mean, my website, it's easy to remember. It's psychology.consulting.
Nice.
And so, yeah, people can check that out. And then I can give you my email address. And then also you follow my LinkedIn stuff. And then I also post on like Instagram and Facebook, but it's just Noble Organizational Consulting is my company. And so that's my
Awesome.
tag.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Perfect. And we'll throw that in the show notes as well, so people can follow
hire you.
Yeah. And hire you for sure. All right. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah. Thanks again, Jeremy.
All right. Thanks, guys.